because Paul was bilingual. He spoke English and Pidgin English, and that really, he was able to get through the world with those two languages. Paul, as you know, Paul was a man of many names. I called him mostly Mr. Paul, but he was also Tall Paul, Pablote, the big guy, the power shovel, and boy, that he could dig, and he dug everywhere he went. The big kahuna, Jean called him Deer. That was pretty much her name for him. In Africa, in Sierra Leone, he was often called the Big Red Devil. And mothers would tell their children if they didn't behave that the Big Red Devil was going to get them. Yeah. He also, and I'm not the only one that thought this, he also looked a lot like Charlton Heston. So I've often thought of Paul as Moses and Ben-Hur and Michelangelo. Paul had a long-term friend that he met even before some of the long-term friends here. He met him in Sierra Leone. And to all of us, this person's name is my friend Eddie, because that's the only way Paul ever talked about him, introduced him. In fact, Eddie came here and he was introduced as my friend Eddie. So that's what we call him. So I'm going to read a little bit of Eddie's letter about Paul. It's called Out of Africa, My Friend Paul. They say that our friends are witnesses to our lives. I was witness to a part of Paul's life that many may not know, and I'll try to share with you if I can. Paul and I lived 5,000 miles apart now, but had a special bond that never faded over 50 years. We met in Freetown, Sierra Leone in 1975. He was a Peace Corps agricultural volunteer, and I was a British VSO volunteer working as an electrical instructor in trade schools. Our first meeting wasn't great. I had ridden my motorbike 200 miles from Benema to Freetown to find a very tall American had hijacked my bed, but we got along just fine after that. I never discovered why Paul liked to stay in the VSO house when visiting Freetown, as there were Peace Corps volunteers around, but I think he enjoyed the cross-cultural thing as an anthropologist, which may also explain his success as a volunteer. Most volunteers, including me, were based in town, usually in schools and colleges or engineering projects, which meant that we had water and electricity at least some of the time, and the company of other volunteers. Paul's project was 50 miles from the nearest asphalt road, and the last 20 miles was barely more than a twisting dirt track, which became impassable in the rainy season. His village, Samai Bendugu, was a typical rural settlement of mainly mud houses with corrugated iron or thatched roofs. No running water, no electricity. Pretty much like living at Sky High or out in a trailer by the lake. The next nearest Peace Corps volunteer was in McKinney, 50 miles away. And here, Paul thrived where others would have been lonely and failed, as many did elsewhere. Paul's project was to develop an irrigation system fed from streams in the surrounding hills to increase rice yields. This I knew, but when I saw the scale of the canals and the concrete sluice system he had built with the villagers, I was stunned. It was a major civil engineering project. It always impressed me that Paul was able to spend 3 years quite happily in such a remote place, quietly working away and making a real difference. Paul knew everyone. The chief was his friend. He knew the villagers. He knew the missionary priests across the northern province. He knew Italian construction workers who were building a dam at Bombuna, 40 miles down the road, who fed him free beer when he motorbiked past. Paul was adept at pulling resources in to support him, particularly engineering students who were handy with the use of levels and setting out. I never, ever heard Paul complain or get angry. He just got on with it. His style was one of quiet understatement who somehow got others to want to do things. That's the Paul I know. Great friendships are precious. Paul always had the ability to walk into my life like the last time I saw him was yesterday. We never had a disagreement that I can recall, and he was one of the nicest men I ever met. Paul achieved much in his life and leaves a rich legacy in the rice fields of Semai Bendugu, as well as in Northern California. He will live on forever in my heart and mind. We will raise a glass to Paul this evening as you are gathering at Terra Firma Farm. We'll celebrate his life and his legacy, and I will celebrate our enduring friendship. My friend Eddie. So the power shovel, he was practicing it for many years before he arrived here.
So Paul and I were living up at Sky High, and the pump broke down, and Paul will fix anything. So we pulled the pump up, tore it apart, needed a condenser. So he goes into town to the pump store to get a condenser. Comes back about an hour later and walks in. Paul, did you get the condenser? He goes, well, I ran into Mike at the store. We got to talking, and well, you know his niece Cindy. And I, look at, Cindy. She's a tall gal. She's there, a couple of days a week. And I'm still looking at him. He goes, she always wears a Rolling Stone t-shirt. And I said, oh yeah, Cindy. Okay, Cindy. And she said, well, Cindy is engaged to Bob Brown. And I say, Bob Brown? And he goes, okay, Bob Brown, he's an organic farmer in Tracy. And he does a Tuesday farmers market near us, in downtown Berkeley. And I go, huh. And he goes, him, he's very small farm, but his produce is immaculate. He sets up right next to Full Belly Farm all the time. And I go, he goes, he always comes, to dinner with us at the Indian food restaurant, after Tuesday market. And he gets chicken tandoori every time. I said, oh, that Bob. Okay. I hope some of you get the flavor and have heard a similar conversation. When I wanted to speak, I'm terrified, by the way. I felt like that. Paul would start in one direction and go in several other directions before he would get back. But he always got back. And so this is a story of how I met Paul, and it was because of a wrong turn. So I got back from Peace Corps in January of 1980. And being terrified to be home after so long, not knowing what to do, I thought, well, I'll go back to school, because that's what I'd done for most of my life. And I got into a program at UC Davis, and I was in the middle of spring quarter, and it had dawned on me for the third or fourth time in my life that I actually hated school. And I realized that that I only liked school because I had friends. I liked being with my friends, and I didn't feel like I had any friends. And I had decided one Friday morning that I just had enough, and I was gonna throw in the towel and drop out of school. And I'm riding around campus, and not knowing where I was going, kind of the last look, and I took a turn onto this gravel road, and I looked down and I see two guys on their hands and knees pulling weeds. And so I thought, okay, this is something I relate to. And I ride down there and I start talking, and it's Raul and Paul. And they're down there, and I put my bike down and get down on my hands and knees, and we're pulling and talking and everything. And Raul is asking me the most personal things about my life, which he does to everybody. And Paul we're just kind of chattering away, and we finish the bed, and it's time to go, and we get up, and I stand up, and then Paul is next to me and stands up and stands up and and I always go. I said, "What? You're a big guy," and he said. We're having dinner at the Red House tonight. Why don't you come over? And I said, well, where is it? And he said, what was that? 7th and D? 7th and D. So I said, 7th and D, I'll find you at the Red House. And he goes, well, it's not red, it's brown, but it's the Red House. So I thought, well, I don't have anything to take. And he said, just come a little early, you can help me cook. So I get there about 5:30, and I walk in, and Mr. Paul is in the kitchen. He puts me to chopping up all kinds of stuff, and he's got the world's biggest skillet, on the oven. I probably don't even need this, do I?
Yes.
Okay. And I start to give him stuff, and he's got his spice rack are pint jars of stuff with things like moose turds, cinnamon, and he starts putting stuff in the thing, and he's like watching somebody conduct the Philharmonic Orchestra. He's putting stuff in, stirring stuff, and then he reaches up. I swear he never looked. He just would grab something, open it up, dump it down, stir it in and stuff, and he grabbed for, he squeezed a bunch of lemons, and he was getting ready to put the lemons in. I said, Paul, you sure you want to put in the lemons? And he looks over at me and he just goes, maybe some of you have seen this. He just goes, You didn't tell Mr. Paul how to cook. For a good reason. He was a good cook. So we had a meal, and I thought, okay, and it's a big house. And I didn't, we walk out and there's like 15 people there. And we eat a meal, and of course I didn't know anyone. Or I think Raul was there, and the food was done, and the dessert was brought out, and of course there was probably some imbibing going on, and it was getting late, and I was tired, and Patrick picked up his guitar and started playing, and the last I remember of that evening was Angel from Montgomery. And I woke up the next morning on the couch with a blanket over me and the smell of waffles in the air. And Mr. Paul, and we were joking about this last night, he was also the king of the waffle iron. Not just waffles, though. He could make anything in a waffle iron. And so I had waffles and went home the next, that day, and Monday came along, and I thought to myself, I'm not dropping out. I have friends. And when you have Mr. Paul as a friend, you got a lot of friends. and we had adventures. A couple of weeks after that, we were going on a floating trip down the American River, which means everybody bringing their inner tubes, jumping in the Kahuna Mobile, and my inner tube someone had loaned to me. By the time we got there, it was losing its air. And I would say, well, I'll wait here for everybody to get done. And Mr. Paul rummages around in the back of the Kahuna Mobile, brings out a bicycle, hooks it up to the inner tube, and we jumped in and we shared. I started out with in the inner tube with the pump just continually going. It's like a 2-hour, 3-hour trip, so we would, switch on and off, with the inner tube. Then one of his nicknames was the King of Comfort. And one weekend, I'd never been to Mount Lassen, and we thought, Paul and Mary Golden and I went up to car camp at Mount Lassen. He had bought himself a new dome tent. He was anxious to try out the dome tent. He had his old tent with him, and so we got up there. We started setting up camp, and Mary and I went out for a walk. We came back about an hour later, and Mr. Paul's sitting there with the thread and a needle. He'd cut a square out of the dome tent and was attaching his old tent to it because the dome tent wasn't long enough. What?
By the time it was done, it was 10 pounds of leaves.
Yeah.
It's like the snow one.
Yeah. But he had to, outside of the red house, outside of his window, he built a platform where he put his mattress so that he could sleep outside. He had to have his things, and I was glad that I was definitely one of the things. After I moved to Oregon, we farmed a little bit together up at Sky High, and then when he moved down to David Hubyar's, I started working with him there. But I met a young woman who wanted to go north, and I went north. I was just telling Judith and some of my friends that, and that's 35 years ago. I never made the kind of friends up there that was in that group. But Paul came up at that time he was a bachelor, and he would come up every Thanksgiving, most Christmases, spend time with us. And Mr. Paul didn't just spend time with you. He repaired things. He helped put up our greenhouses. When one greenhouse got blown away, the next 2 days later, he heard about it, and he was up there, and helped me repair it. About 10 years ago, all 5 of our greenhouses were flattened in the snow, and he heard about that, and he called me up, and he said, you get the pieces together, and I'm going to be up there. He came out, helped us put up, all of the greenhouses. Luckily enough, he met a gal, and introduced me. We got to be friends. Jean, his gal, and let her be a part of our life. He had a good kid, Walker. He was little, not little now. They would come up, spend Thanksgiving with us, and another couple of their friends started spending Thanksgiving with us, and another couple of their friends. So for the last 10 years, we've had a real family at our Thanksgiving, thanks to Paul. This summer, we have an apprentice program at our farm, and so I teach classes every week. And somehow, no matter what the class was, by the end of it, I had a Mr. Paul story to tell my apprentice group. And, and talking about him coming up there all the time and helping out. They said, one of them said, "You must have been his best friend." And I said, I don't know if that's true or not. I only know that he was my best friend.
My name is Paul Underhill, and I farmed with Paul for 30 years, along with Hector Melendez. If it wasn't for Paul, I probably never would have become a farmer. He gave me the opportunity in 1992, just basically on the phone, to come work for him, and he kept giving me opportunities over and over again. After that, it's really kind of a miracle that he didn't fire me the first year that I worked for him, or the second year, or the third year. Paul and I were total opposites. We were like a buddy movie. Lethal Weapon goes to the organic farm. But in a buddy movie, they would never give both characters the same name or have them be both tall and skinny. A lot of people, especially a lot of folks that work for us, just always assumed that he was my father. Because why else would you have two Pauls? In our buddy film, Paul was always the good cop. Everybody knows he had a heart of gold and the patience of a saint. And he was a fantastic listener and always asked really good questions. He was also a really good mediator anytime there was a conflict, which when you've got 20, 30 people working together and 3 partners, there's always a conflict. Paul was empathetic to the extreme, and he was a proud fence sitter. He would say, every time, for example, that Hector and I were having an argument about something, Paul would always say, "I'm always on the fence." And that was really important because we always tried to achieve decisions by consensus, and really because of Paul we were able to do that. Basically because he wouldn't leave the room until everybody was in agreement about something, and I think that's a really amazing quality. Everyone trusted Paul, our employees, our customers, all the other people we did business with. He built a ton of relationships based on that trust, and those relationships were critical to the success of our business. His primary job on the farm was sales, but he wasn't a good salesman. He just liked talking to people and maintaining relationships, and everybody trusted him because they knew he wasn't ever trying to sell you something the way that that what that means in our modern world. Another thing that Paul was great at doing was relating to his elders, and in agriculture that's a skill that's not always well, young farmers aren't always good at, and he really enjoyed hearing stories from the farmers who had been here before he was for years and years, and he recognized that was a free education. You were getting information that no one else is gonna teach you. You're never gonna learn from anybody else. One of those farming elders was Vivi Schuhart, who planted the pistachio orchard that we're sitting in 1970. And Paul knew Vivi because she sold across the way from him at the Davis Farmers Market. She sold the pistachios from this orchard, and he was selling vegetables. Her husband decided to sell the property and didn't exactly advertise it. We found out that the place was for sale, and so we came over to talk to Thule about it, and he wouldn't tell us how much he wanted for it. He wouldn't tell us anything, basically. And he just said, you come up with an offer, and then come back and tell me, and we'll see. And so we went back a couple days later and made him an offer, and he literally yelled us out of the house. he was cursing at us. He said, "Don't ever come back again. That's an insult." And then Vivi called Paul that night, at I think up 10 or 11 at night, and she was whispering to him, "Maybe if you just try a little bit harder." And Paul said he could hear Thule in the background saying, "Vivi, are you talking to somebody on the phone?" But Vivi knew that Paul, one of the things that she really wanted was to keep the pistachio orchard here, and she and everybody else who had come to look at the property, most of them were walnut growers, and she was sure they were going to tear out the pistachios and plant walnuts, and she told Paul, "If you guys get the place, you're going to keep the pistachios, right? You're going to keep doing the pistachios." And he said yes, and he wasn't lying, and she believed him, and so in the end we were able to negotiate to buy the property because of Paul's relationship with Vivi, and that's pretty much what things were like with Paul apparently through his whole life. I didn't know him for his full life. So I talk to Paul every day, sometimes, for hours, for 30 years. And I still hear his voice in my head, just like we all do. That deep sonorous voice that he had, which I'm sure we can all trade quotes here all day long. But I miss him a lot, and farming without him as well. So.
When I moved to Davis almost 40 years ago, and through a really good friend, some of you know Julie Fulton, she asked me if I wanted to go out to Winters where there's some kind of sing-along, and I think I knew Patrick at the time, and it's like, sure, I guess, and I was still a pretty neophyte guitar player, and then found out it was at this place, Sky High, which was owned by the Olkowskis, and as an entomology undergraduate in Berkeley, I'd worked for Bill and Helga for a few years, so that was kind of exciting. But having lived in the Bay Area for a long time and looking at grad schools all over the country, it just somehow ended up that Davis was the best place. And I wasn't a fan of the Central Valley. Driving to the Sierras, it would always be 142 degrees, and you go through Sacramento, and then there's this giant sort of wasteland that reminded me of Los Angeles. So when I moved to Davis, I was like, I want to be out of here in 2 years, and going to that little party, and I remember Jeff and Bill and Raul, and I had already known Judith from Berkeley, but that I think was the beginning of what now is like, why wouldn't you want to live here? It's so cool here, and farmers. I was an entomology grad student, but I would go to these big corporate farms, and so Paul was one of the people there, and then he would kind of keep coming back into our lives in multiple ways, because we knew Jean before she was together with Paul, and then when we heard that they were together, I was like, wow, that's awesome. So it's fun to, having met Paul playing guitar, to back up Raoul and Carol and singing this song.
I'll just add one thing to what Steve said, which is one of the things I like to do in my life, and I've had a few opportunities, is match people together. And it's a great regret in my life that we could have been the matchmaker for Paul and Jean, because we knew them both, but we missed that opportunity. And that goes to Vicky and Paul, another Paul over there, but Vicky Lake, who's here today, gets the award for putting those guys together. So, yeah, great. So we're going to sing Four Strong Winds, and Raoul and I are not performers like the lovely singers that sang before, but we're going to give this a try. But please do help us with this as much as you can. And I can't hold this at all.
Just hit the high notes for us.
Hit the high notes for us. And the low ones and all the ones in between. And say the right words.
Four strong winds that blow lonely, seven seas that run high, all those things that don't change, come what may. The good times, they're all gone, and I'm bound for moving on. I'll look for you if I'm ever back this way. Think I'll go out to Alberta. The weather's good there in the fall. I got some friends that I can go to working for. Still, I wish you'd change your mind if I asked you one more time. But we've been through that 100 times before. Four strong winds that blow lonely, seven seas that run high, all those things that don't change, come what may. If our good times are all gone and I'm bound for moving on, I'll look for you if I'm ever back this way. If I get there before the snow flies, and if things are looking good, you could meet me if I send you down the fair. But by then it would be winter, and much for you to do. And the winds can sure blow cold when you're out there. Four strong winds that blow lonely, seven seas that run high, all those things that don't change come one way. If our good times all are gone and I'm bound for moving on, I'll look for you if I never back this way. I'll look for you if I never back this way.
So I'm actually not Ron right now. I'm Paul Lake, who is in the Philippines, and he is the third of the Pablos. So he's Poblano. So you just. He's the hippie. Okay, thank you, Pablito. Thank you. So Paul is in the Philippines, as I said, with his wife, who it took in COVID times, I think, 3 years to get there. Did you know there's only 2 places on the planet where you can't get divorced? One of them's the Philippines, and the other is the Vatican, if you're Catholic. So his wife is in the Philippines, and she was annulled, and it took him 3 years to get there. But he wrote a story that I'm going to channel for him, and I'm not going to say the whole thing. Gene has the full details, but I'll just read some highlights. So, hi everyone. Like you all, when I learned of Tall Paul passing away on June 12th, it hit me hard. It hit me hard even though I knew the man was fighting cancer. Because he was responding so well to treatment, we had a few years that he was able to continue participating in many activities with our family of friends. I was lucky enough to spend time with him and many of you recently. Paul's passing made me reflect on our relationship. I met him after my final course at UC Davis. Following graduation, I needed a job and met the proprietor of Everything Under the Sun farm. He didn't have a job for me, but suggested that I call Paul Holmes with Sky High Farm. It was probably September 1992 that Paul hired me to work on the farm in winters. Paul taught me a lot in the 6 months or so that I worked on what would become the powerhouse farm called Terra Firma Farm. He and his partners, Pablito, others, produced so much food. I always encouraged Paul to write a book about organic farming in Northern California. Well, I suspect it's in all of your minds right now, so you're all going to have to write that book. But what he said is, I always encourage Paul to write a book about organic farming in Northern California, especially winters in the Capay Valley. He was definitely one of the people on the forefront of the emergence of organic farms and community-supported agriculture programs there. Paul was the kind of guy that after I told him I was hired by the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service and would be leaving the farm in a few weeks, he raised my hourly rate more than once. As I worked my final weeks at the farm, he was a generous guy. Paul Underhill, Pablito, you're not really that short. But I guess in comparison, right? Okay. Paul Underhill was hired on the farm while I was still working there. That made for 3 Pauls at the same time. I think Tall Paul already had the nickname Pablote, as you all know. Paul Underhill, who became Paul Blote's long-term business partner, was then called Pablito, and I was Poblano. We continued to be friends, of course. When Vicki and I, moved to Grass Valley, Paul would visit us regularly at Orchard Springs Farm. There were several houses on the property, and Gene came to live in one of them. At some point, we could all see that spark that occurred between Paul and Gene. The rest is history, including the beautiful young man that is Walker. Witzman Holmes family would often come to spend a weekend or two at the Colfax Highway House. Seasonally, we'd process food, and he talks about all the food processing that we did together, including Petra and myself. So wonderful. I'm not sure how the years passed by to nearly 30. It's a couple years longer for some of us who met at UC Davis in 1990. I was often wandering around away from California, returning occasionally to the loving company of you all. And he talks about seeing the farm that you have and seeing the abundance of crops. And then he says, on one trip to the Green River Brewery during my vagabond year in 2021, Paul and I stopped at a brew house. It's the one right across the bridge outside of Winters, which I guess that's Green River, right? They provide a digital card which gives you access to a wall of beers. It was a fun memory that I have of Paul, the proverbial kid in a candy store. Then he talks about his visit to Hawaii, and then he says, I suppose I could go on, but suffice it to say that I love Paul Holmes as you did. He garnered the respect of many people, and I suspect it will become evident by the number of people who showed up here today. That's clear, isn't it? I'm so grateful for having known Paul and the years of friendship we had. To show that, I often kissed his hand upon greeting him. Sounds sappy, but it's true. So that's Hablano.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I'd like to convey greetings to my husband, Gonzalo, who would have been here if he hadn't been sick today. But anyway, Gonzalo, of course, remembers Paul fondly, too. And then also my dad, Herman the German, who apparently he wanted to convey this today, has really very fond memories of Paul. And my dad now lives at 82 after having spent his life in the then capital of West Germany, Bonn, working for the government. He lives now in a really tiny village in rural France and is really a farm boy at heart. So I think he kind of bonded with Paul over some of these things and music and I don't know. But anyway, but really I just wanted to say what a beautiful man Paul was and share with you, some of you know this because you were there, but share with you one of my fondest memories of Paul in a role that he probably only had that one time in his life, and that is perhaps a little hard to believe if you weren't there. But this was at our wedding, which was kind of a homemade affair with Paul Lake, the one who we just heard the letter of, officiating. And he did that so well, by the way. My mother-in-law, who is in Chile, who is from Chile, who lives in Chile, to this day totally believes that he's a minister. Absolutely, he did this beautifully. But we had everybody play roles, or have a role in this wedding. And Walker, who was at the time maybe 3, I think, you know, like this really cute kid. Walker, where are you? You were so cute. He was supposed to be the flower boy as I was coming in this little rental beach house that we had with my dad, and Walker wasn't really into it at 2 years old, and he was coming with Paul, and I don't know how this happened. I don't know why it was Paul, not Eugene, but this is what it was. And so then in the end, Paul ended up being and I had this really tall man with this beautiful, beautiful smile, and looking a little bemused by the whole thing, with this little boy right in front of him, and that little boy that also I will not forget, who then we had everybody introduce themselves, and then Walker said, and I'm Power Boy from Winters. So I had my tall flower boy and my little Power Boy, and I loved every minute, as did my husband, as did I think everyone who was there. So I just wanted to share this little moment because it was just so beautiful. So thank you, and Paul will always miss you.
Has been well established at this point. Paul loved to sing. He had a beautiful, deep bass voice and was the low-end anchor for many choral groups throughout his life. Some of us have sung with him on and off for up to 40 years here in Winters in various groups. There was Circle of Singers with Teresa Foster. There was Octapella at Dave Springer's house. There was Full Circle, I think also there. There was Wednesday night music. There was Barbershop with Roy Bellhorn, among other people, Dave Springer, Jerry. And I do want to point out that it was Roy Bellhorn's idea for us to sing at this event today. So thank you, Roy. Glad you came. Most recently, for the past for 2 years, we had what we called Tuesday Night Chorus, which was a group of people. Some had sung together before, some not. And we came together and we got to sing for about 2 years. And then when COVID started, our chorus stopped meeting. So we haven't been together for about 2+ years. And Paul was the only person that would occasionally email me and ask, when are we going to start up singing? So I think it's kind of I'll call it a touching twist of fate that our chorus regrouped in August, those who could make it and weren't traveling. And we've been practicing outdoors so that we could sing for you in honor of Paul today. Most of these songs that we're singing are songs that we sang with Paul before the pandemic. We miss Paul. He was a remarkable person, a great singer, and a good friend.
Walker and I just want to thank you all for being here. I wasn't supposed to cry on the very first line. Special thanks to Paul and Marissa for helping with the planning and providing this orchard. I don't. Thank you to Karen for all of those tamales. And thanks for the musicians. And I know I'm going to forget something. For everybody that helped today to make this. It's exactly what we wanted. We wanted this to be like one of Terra Firma's farm days, where we invited the CSA subscribers to a picnic on the farm, and there would be music and food, and they could meet the farmers and show their kids where their food was grown. And Paul enjoyed those days so much. We all did. Even though we frantically got it together.
You guys all did way better than any of the Farm Day Parkers. Thank you so much for your patience with us.
So Paul was really proud to be an organic farmer, and he worked hard. And as we've heard, he was a people person, and he loved to know people's stories. And I think that's why maybe one of his favorite parts of his job was that he got to talk to so many people, from the crew at Terra Firma and his partners and other organic farmers, and to the CSA subscribers, restaurant chefs, produce managers, wholesale buyers, even to the little old ladies who called to buy birdseed. He loved talking to them, and he knew and talked to many of them, maybe almost every day, and for years and years. Well, Pablito, 30 years. Hector, 35 years worked with Paul. So when I was making the posters that are back there and looking at photos, I realized how much fun our family squeezed in between all those working hours. And all our hiking trips and camping and music festivals, trips to Mexico, and so many potlucks. And I'm just so thankful for the friends who shared all of those times with us. Many of you are here. And I know many of you knew Paul long before I met him, and that there are a lot of stories from those times. We've heard some. And I was going to say, I've heard the stories. The Red House, backpacking trips.
If Ed and Pip were here from the UK, which is, Ed is somebody, what's his last name? Ed Murray. He was in the British version of the Peace Corps. Oh, okay. Did you tell the story about him getting arrested in the desert? Was I not supposed to? Okay. Well, I was going to say, if Ed was here, I'm sure he would tell that story, and I was blessed to hear it. I wish I remembered it more, because I would amaze you guys with it.
Well, when they were leaving Sierra Leone at the end of their tour, they just decided to travel up through the Ivory Coast and through the Sahara. And they would just hitch rides on trucks, and Eddie sent this amazing photo, and Paul took the picture, but it's just, you can tell they're just out there in nowhere, and there's big trucks that were hauling something. They must have, one time he said sulfur, that they actually rode in a sulfur truck. But he had taken a picture at dawn, and there were just Eddie and a couple other people by this tiny little campfire, and you could see Paul's shadow on the truck. Check the picture. But he had amazing stories that they paid their way. They had a bunch of alcohol, and then they got in trouble because of that. It's a long story, but somebody who they were with was in prison, and he had to bail them out, and oh my God, it was great.
But the way that Ed told it, it was them. So, in this fictional story, it was them.
But there's another picture back there of he and Eddie singing to a class of kids, and I always wondered, I didn't think they were ever really together at a classroom in Sierra Leone, and Eddie told me, no, that was in the Ivory Coast. They would, on their way back, they would get jobs singing at a school or something to get food. Anyway, yeah, I was going to talk about those other stories, but you've heard those from... Anyway, I don't have a lot of pictures from you guys who knew Paul before me, but they were definitely great stories. So I think Paul had a good life, and I want to thank you all for being a part of that.
I don't have much more to say, but yeah, he was definitely a great dad, and I was so lucky to have met so many of you guys and got to do so many great things with him. But main thing is, I'd love to hear more stories. So if any of you guys have any other, funny stories or things that you think would make the crowd laugh, definitely please come up and share them. I know he would want some good laughs for the rest of the night, so that's all we ask for. Thank you very much, guys.
From about 6th grade till I went away to college, we were best friends. And we were together all the time. He had a great room in the basement. His big room is like a little apartment. And a TV and a piano and a couch and bathroom. And so we just had our fun down there. And he had a ping pong table. We played thousands of games. He was very athletic before his back got the better of him. I think I remember in grade school thinking he could have been somebody in sports. He was the fastest kid in the class, you know, tall, fast, agile. And anyway, we both liked sports, and we did that all the time together. That was our main thing. We loved basketball. He was the tallest kid in the class. I was the shortest kid in the class. So I ruined his game. But anyway, I really love Paul because, and especially since thinking about him since he died. Being the best friend from about 6th grade to go away to college, those are very formative years. And I was a troubled kid, and we were each other's best friend, but in looking back, he was like a rock in a way, because I was very kind of shy around girls, and so me and him were just best friends, and it was okay. We could be each other, we could be ourselves, and we did that for unknown times. You know, we were both pretty good kids. We didn't screw around a lot, but he was better than I was. He seemed to have a natural sense of right and wrong. If I would do something that was silly, he wouldn't participate. He would stand back. He seemed to know this is not right, even as a youngster. And I think it was, my guess is his mother, you know, he went faithfully to the Lutheran church, and I'm sure I have a feeling his mother taught him right from wrong and all those good things, and it was in him, and so that's who we were. You know, for years and years we would spend whenever we had an argument, which was very rare. I would give in, I would get bored and go over to his house again. I'd say hello, and then he would kind of roll his eyes, and oh no. But then immediately it was like, come on in, and everything was back to normal. We were friends again, and that's just how it was. That's my whole life from during that time. You know, he could have been. I think one of the reasons that he got into singing as much as he did because of his back problems. He couldn't participate in sports that much. He had a back brace that pushed down during the middle of high school. Well, as a freshman, his first game in football, he broke his leg, and so he was out for the season. And then he started wearing this brace where he pushed down on his hips and up on his neck. Can you imagine that? And he made him look like a monster. He's so tall anyway. And he had to wear it under his shirt, had to wear it every time, all the time, except when he's in bed. And that went on for a couple years, so he couldn't go out for sports, but he could sing. And I think he liked music anyway before this. And but I think that's part of why he gravitated towards singing as much as he did. And that's all I got.
When the sun